Indigenous peoples who continue to shape the evolution of this territory, the centuries of knowledge that Indigenous cultures carry about this region, and the impact of contemporary Indigenous knowledges and commitments to social justice in transforming our institution. I'm very happy this evening to welcome you all on behalf of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies to the Winter 2019 New Feminist Research Lecture. This is our 10th in the series, an initiative initially launched by Dr. T.L. Cowan to highlight the cutting-edge feminist research of contemporary, non-tenured faculty and public intellectuals who are making significant contributions to national and international debates in the field. Dr. Cowan is currently Assistant Professor of Digital Media Cultures in the Department of Arts, Culture, and Media at the University of Toronto. And because it's our 10th anniversary, I just want you to have a sense of the amazing caliber of the people, including our present speaker, who have participated in this series. We began with Dr. Ilya Parkins, who is the WGST coordinator from UBC Okanagan. Her talk was entitled Timing Femininity in Christian Dior's Self-Fashioning, a looking at Dior's design history as a form of autobiography. Dr. Jasmine Rolt is currently Assistant Professor with the Institute of Communication, Culture, Information, and Technology at U of T, Mississauga, and she presented on Mediating Affect in the Queer Americas, Cases of Creative Resistance, on effective approaches to creative street activism. Dr. Trish Salah, now Associate Professor in our sister program at Queen's University, spoke on gender struggles, trans organizing, trade unionism, and radical communities, linking transgender justice to struggles of working class and colonized peoples around the world. Trish hosted the first Transgender Minority Literatures Conference in Canada in May of 2014. Dr. Tiffany Mueller-Murdahl, now Senior Lecturer at Simon Fraser's Gender, Sexuality, Women, and Urban Studies program, held the Ruth Wynn Woodward Chair in Gender and Urban Studies while serving on the board of our national urban design organization, Women Transforming Cities, when she gave her talk, Emerging Feminist Urban Futures. Then, writer Melanie Schnell, who some of you may have seen the other day, presented a talk on her research in Somalia and the writing process for her award-winning novel, While the Sun is Above Us. Her talk, recounting the truth of war through feminist fiction, emphasized the power of feminist writers to bring the lived impact of diverse women's realities to public consciousness. She now teaches at the University of Regina. Mary Bunch, former Shirk postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Sexual Diversity Studies at the University of Toronto and coordinator of Women's and Gender Studies at McGill University, presented on Julia Kristeva, Disability and the Singularity of Vulnerability, examining Kristeva's work as a critical disabilities activist and thinker, whose interactionist theory rejects neoliberal assimilation, calling instead for cultural revolution. Then, Dr. Manuela Valle-Castro, who grew up under the military dictatorship in Chile and completed her PhD through UBC's Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice Institute, gave a lecture on performance as activism and utopia in the Americas, exploring lines of convergence and difference across social movements in Latin America and performance activism in Canada, including the I Don't Know More movement. Eleanor Sunchild, a proud member of Thunder Child First Nation and member of the Saskatchewan Bar since 1999, presented her talk, The Impacts of Settler Colonial Violence on Indigenous Women, which addressed the continuing legacies of the Indian Act, the residential school system, the 60s Scoop, and the genocidal impacts of Canadian colonial policies on Indigenous women. Last year, Dr. Prabha Pilar, a diasporic mestiza woman from Colombia with a PhD in performance studies, feminist theory and research from UC Davis, and postdoc in digital humanities and new media from UWinnipeg, presented her talk, Situated Embodied Resistance to 21st Century Necro-Techno-Colonialism, to interrogate the role of doctrine of discovery in supporting a global apparatus of surveillance capitalism. So pretty amazing crew, and we're so pleased because all of those ones got away. We get to have with us tonight Mirela David. So for our 10th presentation, I'd just like to introduce Mirela as Assistant Professor in Modern Chinese History Women and Gender Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. She's written many, many articles, and her dissertation, Free Love, Marriage, and Eugenics, Global and Local Debates on Sex, Birth Control, Venereal Disease and Population in 1920s and 30s China, was supported by an NYU Mellon Dissertation Award in History and the Provost Global Research Fellowship at NYU in Shanghai. Tonight, Mirela will examine the work of radical women's activist Ye Haiyan, captured in the documentary Hooligan Sparrow. How many have seen it? You're going to rush home and watch it, I swear. In which internationally acclaimed Chinese female director Nanfu Wang investigates activist responses to sexual assault in China. Drawing on Judith Butler and other theorists, Mirela will explore how feminist filmmakers and activists are addressing internet and film censorship, as well as harassment and imprisonment by the Chinese state. As you can see, her talk is entitled Hooligan Sparrow, Representation of Sexual Assault in Chinese Cinema, Sexual Assault Activism in China, and the Limits of Me Too in the Face of Male-Dominated State Power. Let's give Mirela a welcome.
And by the way, you can watch the film on Netflix, so very convenient. Okay, so this talk examines the activities of radical women's rights activist Ye Haiyan, who has appropriated a negative term and whose story was captured in the documentary Hooligan Sparrow. Here I refer to the term hooligan, by which she is described often by the Chinese media. This documentary breaks with many taboos in Chinese cinema. It is the first internationally acclaimed documentary by a Chinese female director to center upon investigating the activities of a sex and women's rights activist in China, as well as to address the controversial and politically sensitive topic of sexual assault in China. This is the first study to address the cinematic contributions of Wang Nanfu, who is the director, and also Ye Haiyan's activist, or to treat the representation of sexual violence as a topic of concern in Chinese cinema. So nothing was done on this topic, but interesting. This talk examines the feminist activist writings posted on the online social media account of Ye Haiyan on Sina Weibo, an influential Chinese social media platform, between 2013 and 2014, and on Twitter, to which she took after 2015, when her Weibo account was shut down. But she still writes in Chinese, she can't write in English. So this talk will show how female directors' subjectivities bring productive representations of sexual violence in Chinese cinema. And a bit on my theoretical framework. According to Judith Butler, the formation of politics that represents women as the subject of feminism is itself a discursive formation and effect of a given version of representational politics. The feminist subject is thus constituted by the political system through which emancipation is sought. This is a good way to understand the relationship between Chinese politics and Chinese feminism, but also how Weibo first gave feminists a social media platform to voice their concerns, but yielded to state power to mold the feminist subject. For subjectivity to emerge, says Butler, one has to first be subjective, thus the relationship between feminism in China and state power. Butler also states that the subject of women is not ahistorical or universal, but rather contingent upon its political and social environment. Therefore, Ye Haiyan's activism has to be understood as resistance to state and local police suppression of women's rights activists and feminists in China. Given state clampdown of feminist activists, the limits of Me Too in China will also be addressed. Drawing on Gayatri Spivak's question, can the subaltern speak? This talk also interrogates the possibility of female activist subaltern voices and the possibility of capturing the subjectivity of sexual assault survivors. This talk also engages in presenting an ontology of Chinese feminists from which Chinese feminist perspectives from the Chinese feminist perspectives in their daily struggles with the Chinese state. So the following research questions will guide my talk. What does it mean to be a feminist activist in contemporary China? In what way can Chinese feminist activists form of community of action and can impact social change? What are the limits of activists in the face of overwhelming male-dominated state power? What is the connection between activism and participatory documentary? What is the role of female subjectivity in directing documentaries that include the theme of sexual assault? So this is the poster of the film, which is really requires little commentary, but just to tell you that, yeah, you can see here the police and the sparrow, right? But her name is Yan. Yan means sparrow, right? So Liu Mang Yan, Hooligan Sparrow. So yeah, I think it's a great poster, and maybe if we can play the trailer. I want to show you just 2 minutes from the trailer, so that we can get a sense.
This afternoon, I'm going to meet with the national security agents who will come to see me at 3 o'clock and investigate on what I've been doing during the summer.
我们再来关注海南小学校长带女生开房事件。5月8号，万宁县某小学的班主任发现该班的6名6年级女生没有来上课。
就是那个校长去玩啊，开房啊，因为那个就是在锅箱里，就是到10分钟啊，但是摸还是哪还冒出红中啊这样。
就是我们打电话打给属于政府都知道，他说这网不用接触就是媒体啊，还有大陆的律师。
为什么这个校长他找了6名女孩去开房？其实他这是重大的性误。
海南这种事情在中国发生无数次，所以我们来到海南准备继续抗议，不想让罪犯再次逃脱。
A few days later, the protests went viral.
叶海燕小学的小学生女生开房投诉，咨询并向叶海燕采访。
With so much attention focused on the case, the government reacted.
1年之外的那个我们是有安排的。我拿这边过来看一个。哪里行这
楼下还有4、5个人守着。
那晚上。
我也不知道，我被人家打成了2次还是2个小时。电影，所以他说你上来就打断你的腿什么的。
可能我的个性就是比较强硬的，属于那种的，就把我关了、把我杀了之后，可能我都不会改变。
So yeah, you can find it very conveniently on Netflix. Okay. So in contemporary China, rape culture is rampant, also due to the lax enforcement of existing rape laws. Sexual harassment in overcrowded spaces, public buses, or subways is common in post-socialist countries, lacking adequate sex education and gender studies programs, and China is no exception. Activists to bring awareness to sexual assault has to contend with the lack of political and youth activist involvement in the post-Tiananmen era, where political repression has been oppressive. The Chinese government is wary of public protests, human rights, feminist and LGBT activists, in the post-Tiananmen era and has demonstrated an aggressive pursuit of labor rights and human rights lawyers, including harassment and imprisonment of prominent and vocal activists, especially under Xi Jinping's leadership, who, if you don't know, is president forever, for life. Me Too in China, which is called 我也是, I am also kind of the same, and feminist activism is intersectional, including female activists, LGBTQ activists, Chinese nationals and Chinese diaspora, and overseas Chinese students. So just a short history of Me Too in China. Luo Tianqian was the first woman in China to accuse publicly an academic who sexually harassed her. And feminist activist Zhang Leilei started organizing and mobilizing public opinion in China on sexual assault. More than 9,000 students from 70 universities expressed their support online and shared their stories of sexual harassment, which, according to feminist Liu Ping, had university policy changing implications both for the Ministry of Education and for some universities. This was the result of student organizing efforts. And it's been said that this is probably the largest student movement protest since the pro-democracy movement in June 4th, which ended badly with the Tiananmen Square massacre. Chinese Me Too activists see themselves as part of a global community of activists. But this is what they have to contend with. The arrest of 5 feminist activists in 2015, right on the eve of March 8th, kind of where we are now, sent shockwaves through the women's movement in China. And the reason they were arrested was because they were planning to organize some LGBT awareness work and some activities regarding sexual harassment. So this is way before the Me Too. But Me Too in China, unlike in the US, started in universities, paying close attention to the development in the US. In China, feminist activists circumvent government censorship by the use of virtual private networks, or VPNs, ensuring a safe encrypted internet connection. Though lately these don't work anymore. According to Liu Ping, Chinese feminist activists have their own interpretation of Me Too, one that is localized but also global. Chinese feminist activists who have been organizing years before the Me Too exploded on the global stage can now garner international attention thanks to the global Me Too movement. However, before the global Me Too movement, Chinese feminist activists like Ye Haiyan were already protesting energetically against the local government authorities' handling of sexual assault and molestation cases in China, recognizing the vulnerability of young girls. Sexual molestation of schoolgirls is particularly egregious, contested, and disturbing on a background of weakness in child protective services in China. So now I want to talk to you about Hooligan Sparrow, the activist documentary, and Wang Nanfu, the documentarian as participant. The documentary, Hooligan Sparrow, tells the story of Ye's activist protest against authorities in the case of 6 elementary school children who had been led to a hotel room on Hainan Island by a school principal and a local official. The documentary contains some shocking activist images and shows Ye Haiyan's radicalism of using frontal nudity for her activist work. Ye engages in what Wang names confrontational activism. Hooligan Sparrow begins with a shot of the documentarian as participant. so you remember Wang's face. We get a glimpse of a young female director, Nanfu, who at the time was still an NYU graduate student, saying, "That's me with the camera." Wang starts with her own positionality because she wants to address the issue of censorship and state suppression of feminist activism. The first shot shows Wang preparing a hidden microphone under her skirt to catch an audio tape of her interview with the National Security Agency. While shooting, Wang even resorts to using spy glasses, which unfortunately the police also use, so they discover them quite quickly and destroy them. To evade the police, Wang often traveled by bus, as it does not require an ID like traveling by train does, which is much more comfortable. Wang made the documentary at great personal risk, smuggling her footage out of China through friends, and so can no longer return to China because of the explosives for political content of the documentary. Wang identifies strongly with the background of Ye Haiyan. As she tells us in the documentary, like me, Ye is from a poor farming village. Wang's own story of becoming a documentarian is remarkable as it is unlikely. Her father died when she was only 12 years old. She did not even have a TV until she was a teenager. Various scholarships carried her from her village in Jiangxi province to Shanghai and to grad school in the United States. Throughout the documentary, we see glimpses of how Wang hides herself and her camera from the Chinese police. The most harrowing scene that you saw even in the trailer, where Wang herself is a protagonist, shows Wang and Yasin, Ye's young daughter, being chased by the police up the stairs while staying at a friend's apartment because they'd been kicked out of their apartment. The camera still shoots hallucinatory frantic images, and the sound of their laboring breaths keeps the viewer in suspense in what could be called an aesthetics of fright or flight. So this documentary makes an important contribution to the independent documentary movement in China by bringing to light the topic of sexual assault and state suppression of feminist activists through a gendered lens. Using feminist aesthetics, I will unpack the power dynamic in this documentary, as well as the interplay between the filmmaker subjectivity and the female rights activist subjectivity. So Wang lived, this is Ye, Wang lived with Ye Haiyan in the summer of 2013. According to Wang, by living together, the experiences of her subjects becomes hers, and this also changed her own experience. Thus, even if Wang initially wanted to make a documentary about Ye's very radical sex work activist, the topic changed according to Ye's own activism at the time. Wang's encounter with Ye Haiyan's work also made her into an activist filmmaker, and Wang hopes her film can help free the human rights activists in China through international pressure. The documentary itself has a non-linear narrative. We are introduced to some characters that will reveal themselves later on, such as the local police authorities dressed in plain clothes. So there are several stories that are intertwined. For example, we're shown how the media distorted the survivor story, the censorship of the local media, how Ye is harassed by a brothel owner where she previously worked as a sex worker, also sex worker activist, this I will talk about later, and by the local police, Ye's dislocation, and Wang Nanfu's interrogation. Wang is very conscious of the documentarian's ability to manipulate time by choosing a moment in time that is significant for storytelling. According to Wang, through editing, a director can choose to slow time, to speed it up, to use flashbacks and flash forwards. She put to good use those devices by introducing us to a few characters early on in the documentary. One example was when she highlighted a father riding a moped with his children, which, by the way, is quite common in China, that was watching Ye Haiyan's protest, only to reveal later on that he was the father of a child survivor of sexual assault. Actually, one of the children, or one of the 6 children. A shocking picture of a young girl's underwear smeared with blood is captured by Wang, one that the desperate parents have made public in hopes to get justice for their daughter. Ye Haiyan was critical of warning cities authorities in Hainan province who were afraid that the parents of the victims would contact lawyers from Beijing. She described the reluctance of the parents to meet with the activists for fear of being followed by the police. Ye recognized both the agency of the parents, whose children have been sexually abused, demanding that they have a say in the proceedings, as well as expressed her criticism of the inaction of the Women's Federation, which has long been a sort of mouthpiece for CCP interests, and just recently they've totally criticized kind of Western feminist frameworks that criticize Chinese politics. So it's not exactly a feminist organization. According to Ye's criticism of the local authorities, the legal framework that allows sex offenders to get away with light penalties needs to be reworked to exclude the charge of prostitution in cases involving sex with a minor. So Ye often writes on her posters, abolish the guilt of spending the night with a young girl prostitute. Ye wants to critique the legal framework that can controversially assign guilt to an underage girl by association with prostitution. Speaking about the possibility of the consciousness of the subject, such as the widow who immolates herself on the pyre in India, Gayatri Spivak shows us why that is impossible, because of the epistemic violence of imperialist law. Likewise, it is very difficult to get at the consciousness of molested girls because of the epistemic violence of this narrow legal framework that further victimizes them. So this kind of law doesn't exist, right, in the West, but China is very particular. Moreover, Ye writes she will resist till the end. Thus, Ye appeals to a foundational feminist concept of resistance that guides her feminist activists by resisting the scrutinizing gaze and the pressure from the local authorities, but also by circumventing government agents who are following her all the time. Furthermore, Ye speaks as a mother, a concerned citizen, and as a human rights activist. After having found out that she was investigating Kwanzi Popai, Ye Haiyan, who at the time was on Hainan Island, wrote on Weibo that her child was alone at home and that if something would happen to her daughter, it would be the government's fault. She also pleaded with the government to stop harassing her. In the documentary, the activist and the filmmaker put out a startling disclaimer that shows their fears and the risks they were taking. If anything happened, please try to find me. At great personal risk, Wang continued shooting guerrilla style despite being pursued by the police. The documentary received a nomination for Sundance 2016 Grand Jury Prize and was shortlisted for the 2016 Oscar in the feature-length category. And thank God it didn't win because that would have made Ye's life hell. So there is also a Chinese version of the documentary, and Wang is doing some underground screenings in China. An official screening in China is unlikely because of the overt criticism of the Chinese authorities. Now, I want to tell you a bit about Ye Haiyan. She's an unabashed feminist who drives a pink moped. I know this because she put a picture on it. Her most famous hashtag, "Hey Principal, get a room with me," and I'm going to show a picture of it. received many replies with pictures from people with this hashtag from both men and women of all shapes and sizes. As a result of this online campaign, Ye was criticized in the Chinese media for showing self-display or self-show. This makes little sense in English, but this is what they say in Chinese. Ye responded that not all media is so ignorant and devoid of morality as the ones who are attacking her, instead of talking about the vulnerability of grammar school children. Ye also criticized the shameless online public opinion, drawing attention to a very serious phenomenon, cyberbullying of activists in China. She urged the government, the media, and the public to care about sexual assault cases on campuses and school grounds and less about her person. Ye further condemned the police, who is also listening to the government in pressuring her. Ye ended her criticism emphatically: shameless government, shameless media, and water army. Now this I have to explain. Here Ye referred to the internet water army, or Wang Luo Shuizun, which are ghostwriters paid to sway the public opinion according to the government's wishes. Thus, Ye articulates a critique of government interference in the public sphere. To comprehend the forces that oppress Ye's subjectivity, it would be useful to go back to Gayatri Spivak's question, can the subaltern speak? If for Spivak, the subaltern woman, the subject formation of third world woman, is foreclosed by imperialism and patriarchy, the formation of the subaltern woman activist in China is similarly foreclosed by a patriarchal and authoritarian political order that oppresses and silences female activists. So I'm going to explain to you more about the internet problem. The Chinese state has built a legal framework for internet security in the late 90s and tightened its internet regulations after 2004, fearing the political impact of the free flow of information. This is known in China as the Great Firewall, which forbids content that is politically sensitive. Even like birth control that I was researching. Okay. Sina Weibo is a domestic social media platform that has an internal system of human and software censorship that caters to the Chinese government. In fact, the Chinese government has forbidden the word feminist from Weibo, as it is a bad word, and has a troll army that attacks feminist content online. Some women are using this term called rice bunny. In Chinese, it's called Me Too. It's a homonym. A homonym for Me Too. It makes no sense, right? But it sounds like Me Too. Unfortunately, even the use of homonyms and emoji related to the Me Too have been now banned as the censors have caught on. Ye Haiyan also complained about the restrictive environment.